There are these fulcrum points in a lot of stories where everything changes. In narrative writing, it is called the inciting incident. Something happens that starts a snowball rolling that can't be undone. A team of criminals opens fire in a bank, taking everyone hostage. Now the ball is rolling, except that one of the tellers, the new girl, of course, is hearing all this from the bathroom, and now it's up to her to save the day. The robbery is the inciting incident. In The Fugitive, a doctor's wife is attacked and killed at his home. Ball rolling. And he is framed for the murder, buried in a hole which he spends the rest of the movie cleverly digging himself out of. However, sometimes something occurs later in the story, like the sixth sense, which changes the meaning of everything we've witnessed up to that point. You're looking directly at something, and it just doesn't make sense until, boom, oh shit, the M. Night Shyamalan twist. We scramble to rewind our minds to reconsider everything from earlier in the story. You zoom out, your eyes widen, your mouth opens. No effing way! You see it plainly in the facial expressions of the news anchors watching live as the second plane hits the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. The reality of what's happening washes over their face at the same time. Terrorists. War. Like washer fluid hitting a windshield, all of the dust and pollen that you never even noticed is suddenly rinsed away and you're like, oh, that's what's happening. This is always followed by a moment of silence as all of the details flood in. Time seems to slow down and let us soak in as much as we can. And then reality fades in again. Everyone knows Shyamalan abuses this device, but I can't diss it altogether. In truth, some of my favorite authors use the twist ending over and over. Edgar Allan Poe, Ray Bradbury, and today's author, HP Lovecraft. In his short story called Pickman's Model, we enter Lovecraft's eerie imagination via a traumatized narrator who attempts to describe his own strange experiences to his friend, to us, the readers, essentially. But all the details we've learned are given new gravity, all because of the existence of a photograph. Similarly, but not fictionally, a photo was the undoing of one of our favorite creeps to analyze, dissect, if you will. The Milwaukee Cannibal, Jeffrey Dahmer. He preferred to be called Jeff, so unlike on previous episodes, I'll be careful to always refer to him as Jeffrey. It shouldn't have taken as long as it did to catch this malignant cancer in human form, but for some disappointing reasons it did. Both of these stories, fictional and real, came to a screeching halt at the discovery of a simple image. If not for these photographs, who knows how long these two secrets would have festered. The power of an image, on today's episode of Novel Meets Evil. Novel Meets Evil is a true crime podcast where we compare literary characters from modern fiction to real cases to see what we can learn about human nature. You think you know your neighbors, your coworkers, your spouse, but the real creeps hide in plain sight every day. What's behind the curtain? What are they hiding? Do you really want to know? And why are you so eager to look? What are you hiding? I'm here to tell you that there's nothing wrong with looking. Just don't stare. It'll give you the creeps. Part 1. Dahmer's Parlor. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, July 1991. A fresh, young Milwaukee detective was called to the scene of a crime in a rough part of town. It was near the beginning of the night shift that he'd been assigned to what the homicide department jokingly referred to as the next stiff up. The next stiff that shows up, you're there. He pulled his squad car up to the Oxford Apartments and unfolded all 6'7", 240 pounds of his frame onto the sidewalk. The radio call had come in from dispatch.
Detective, we've got a couple of really excited Milwaukee cops on the phone. They need you across town.
The onlookers got out of his way as he approached the building. Here we go again, thought Detective Pat Kennedy. Stepping up to the building, Kennedy was thinking about other things. His marriage, his family, his career prospects, when a young cop held open the main entrance for him. As soon as he stepped into the lobby, the odor was unmistakable, especially to a seasoned cop like Kennedy. Human remains. From experience, Kennedy knew better than to keep his suede coat on. Certain fibrous materials would allow the natural odor of death to seep into the fibers, and once they were in there was no getting them out. The next stiff up must have been here for a while, he thought. Come to think of it, how had no one complained about the stench? Well, as it turns out, they had. Many times, in fact. No one listened. Detective Kennedy gave his coat to the fresh-faced cop and told him to put it in his car. The detective lumbered down the hall. Just another day on the job, right? But little did he know, each step he took brought him closer to one of the craziest crime scenes in true crime history. An hour before this, a half-nude man ran terrified down the street with a handcuff dangling from one wrist, screaming something about a crazy man up the street. 2 Milwaukee beat cops stopped the frazzled man, Tracy Edwards, and told him to hang tight while they radioed for help. They got on the police radio and asked,
"Just curious if anyone lost any equipment this fine evening."
This was code for, did anyone have a suspect escape custody? It was rare, but occasionally this would happen when a perp was being processed. Edwards was shaking, claiming a crazy freak had tried to hurt him back at the apartment up the street. He pointed toward the Oxford. The cops rolled their eyes. Great, another gay couple domestic. This isn't what I signed up for. Edwards said, "Look, I don't want to cause you any trouble. I don't want to press charges. Just please take the cuffs off so I can go home and you won't even have to worry about this." That was music to their ears. Let the freaks be freaks and keep it out of the streets. The problem was Milwaukee police used Smith & Wesson handcuffs, which used a different key than the ones hanging off Edwards' hand. So in order to get the cuffs off, they would have to go back to the apartment building and deal with this guy's boyfriend. Get the key to unlock Edwards and everyone could go on their merry way. When the apartment door opened, the cops bogarted their way through the door and into the apartment. Instantly, they were hit with a sickening wave of putrid air. Rot, acidity, unsuccessfully masked by the sharpness of cleaning products. The man in the apartment had no time to think of a lie, and instead he tried to fight. He fought off 2 large, fit cops and almost escaped. Probably would have, if not for being pickled drunk. Once the man was cuffed in hogtied fashion on the apartment floor, he broke out in sobs of resignation. Edwards was still in the hallway, refusing to set foot in the apartment again. The VHS that the man had put on for them to watch together, to set the mood, The Exorcist Part 3, could still be heard playing from the bedroom down the hall. The cops began snooping around the apartment. "Hey, get a load of this freak's little photo collection." The cop handed the Polaroids to his partner and addressed the man lying face down on the carpeted floor. "Where'd you get the autopsy photos?" "That's city property. Don't you know that's illegal?" No answer. As he explained to Detective Kennedy an hour later, "I looked at these post-mortem photos. I'd seen that kind of thing before. Except the more I looked at them, the more I realized that the room they were taken in was actually the room I was standing in. This scares the hell out of me. Until that moment, this had just been a stinking apartment of a drunk and disorderly sexual deviant. But this would go on to become the most reviled apartment in living memory as Jeffrey Dahmer lay covered in rug burns and welts on the floor in the next room. He was weeping. "Hey, you fruit, where's the key to the handcuffs?" Dahmer said he honestly didn't know. "You gotta be shitting me. How are we supposed to get the cuffs off?" He explained that he'd misplaced the key years ago. Dahmer said this had never been a problem before. He always got the cuffs off by removing the hands. He was thrown in the back of a squad car and taken to booking at the Milwaukee Police Department. Outside the interview room, Kennedy consulted with the arresting officers before telling them to uncuff the suspect so he could talk to him freely. One young officer said, "You sure you want to do that, Pat?" He held up his red-knuckled hands. I fought with this guy and he's no pussy. The 6'7" detective nodded. You get more bees with honey than with vinegar, kid. Lesson to learn. And the cuffs were taken off. Kennedy stood looking at this pathetic, sour-looking man. He didn't look dangerous. He didn't look anything. Dahmer, who had been staring at the floor in a stupor, lifted his head when Kennedy asked him if he'd like coffee or a cigarette. He said yes, he'd like both. Good cop. Kennedy left and came right back with 2 cups of coffee and a pack of cigarettes. So, Kennedy began, what can you tell me about the head in the refrigerator? Or better yet, what about the other 11 heads in your kitchen? Or the penises in the pickle jar? Dahmer took a drag and smirked at Kennedy. When I tell you what I have to tell you, you will be famous. But you will also hate me. Kennedy smirked back. I'm not here to hate you, Mr. Dahmer. Call me Jeff. Dahmer sipped his coffee. If you put me in a holding cell, will you please see that I get my own cell? Kennedy realized this man must have seen the inside of the nasty, violent group holding cell called the Bullpen during one of his previous arrests and wanted no part in that. Well, it's a busy night, Jeff. All the individual cells are full. I can send you down to the Bullpen, or you can stay and talk to me. It's up to you. The two sat talking for over 3 hours, chatting about nothing much, before the suspect began to break. Kennedy recalled that once he broke, he began divulging details of incidents going back as far as high school. There's a jogger who Jeffrey would lust over when he'd run through the wooded trails near the Dahmer home. He thought if he could just knock him out, he might enjoy laying next to his smooth, athletic body. He took a baseball bat to the trail and hid in wait, but that day the jogger never came, and Jeffrey went home unfulfilled. I wonder how differently the saga would have played out if the jogger had come through that day, but he didn't. His first murder would come soon afterward, and it wasn't premeditated. Then there was a long break where he tried to make a go of life as an adult. He failed utterly at this, and once he committed his second murder, which was premeditated, well, after that he picked up steam, and more than a dozen later, here he was in an interrogation room smoking cigarettes and drinking police-issued coffee with an enormous but amiable detective, like pals. Luckily for the rest of us, he was never to set foot in the free world again. There had been a sigh of relief in the Oxford apartment building when Milwaukee police finally took the creep away, which is great, but there had been many moments where this case could have gone another way. There was one opportunity after another where mental health professionals and judges and lawyers could have done more. If only the Milwaukee police had looked a little closer at this apartment, investigated the perp even a little bit on previous occasions. If only they'd been a little more empathetic to the people they saw as undesirables, sexual perverts, and public nuisances. In macho cop culture at the time, they thought the less they knew about the gay subculture, the better. What did that have to do with them? A young Laotian man named Konorek Synthesymphone, who Jeffrey had lured into his web with the promise of cash for photos, his usual ruse, was found stumbling naked down the street, visibly beaten. When the police approached him, the kid was mumbling in another language, but was able to take them back to the apartment, where Dahmer smoothly explained that this boy was not a boy, but his lover, and they'd been fighting. Thanks for bringing him home, officers. Not wanting to get involved in a gay affair, the cops left the Oxford, and a moment later, Dahmer was giggling and strangling the teen. So how did it get this far? How did the odor alone not bring in the authorities? Well, Dahmer's neighbors were smart, and they knew something was going on in that apartment. Not just the smell, which was acrid and impossible to ignore, but also the sounds of struggle and screaming, and then worse, silence. Police didn't listen to inner-city blacks complaining about a weird, foul-smelling white guy in their building. This doesn't involve me. Let those types deal with their own dirty laundry. I keep coming back to that slow-mo moment before Detective Kennedy showed up, and picturing the 6'1" cannibal lying on the floor sobbing as the inevitable approached like one of those lightning clouds in Stranger Things. He knew what would happen if these two cops took even a cursory look around, but based on his past good luck, that is to say racist, homophobic dismissal masquerading as luck, I wonder if he thought he might get off again. One officer steps forward, opens a dresser drawer, and pulls out a stack of Polaroids. Tick, tick, tick. He flips through the pictures, shaking his head. He holds one up for his partner to see. Tick, tick, tick. He looks at a few more, then stops, furrowing his brow. He squints at the photo, scouring for detail, looks up at the decor of the room, flips to another picture, looks around the room. Tick, tick, tick. I can't be seeing what I think I'm seeing. That kind of thing doesn't happen here in Milwaukee. And this gay twerp, he couldn't do such a thing. But here it is in color. The furniture, the wallpaper, the impossible. A photo and a handcuff key were what finally brought this case into the light of day. I'm certain that if the key was a different make, the police never would have darkened Dahmer's door. A cop who couldn't just be grossed out by the gay guy and sweep it under the rug again, although he might like to. Who really looked at the images in front of him for one extra moment, pushed the lever a bit more. The slaughtered figures on Polaroid paper. And that light bulb silently popping. For just a moment, he's the only person on Earth who knows. The lever's threshold has been passed, when that bell of doom rang out in that small Milwaukee apartment. This began a recalibration of what was possible in America because of the horrors that had occurred right here in that room, inside the photo. A handcuff key and a photograph. History turns on a dime. Part 2. Pickman's Model. Richard Upton Pickman was one of a handful of painters in the Boston Art Club who would get together socially to drink and to compare their developing work. The problem was that Pickman's paintings weren't your everyday artwork in two main ways. This is Lovecraft, after all. Firstly, the painter's near-photographic realism was so unnervingly lifelike that it intimidated other artists who were trying their hands at realism. Like other realist painters, he was surely using models and stock photographs to render such perfection. But even so, the sense of truth in his images was problematic. Secondly, his images were not of still life, landscapes, or normal portraits. Pickman tended toward graphic images of violence, primordial monsters committing unspeakable horrors in weird subterranean hellscapes. The combination of self-evident realism and simple impossibility. Pickman's art was too realistic not to be real, and too hideously evil to be tolerated. Thus, he was ostracized from their sort of Boston artist meetup. Maybe they were just posers who didn't really want to get into the grit of art. Maybe, like me, they were intrigued but also closet scaredy cats. I already told you about that, don't judge me. If you're a musician performing songs about violence and murder with a comparably angry delivery, okay, I'm convinced you're scary. But would I want you to remain part of our musicians club? Sure. Creativity can be dirty, and a good author, for example, has to write in other voices, highlighting the scary and ugly aspects of this in order to prove a point about the beauty of that. A writer may include an outspoken racist character, being, well, racist, in order to present racism itself as the subject of scrutiny. However, if the artist's presentation is such that we actually believe they advocate for murder or violence or racism, now we have a problem. This is what happened when Pickman showed his piece entitled Ghoul Feeding to the Boston Art Club, due to how convincing its horror was. It seemed less like art depicting horrible subjects and more like an open window into a world of real ghouls. As an aside, I have a dislike for torture porn films and body horror. It's too real for me, and I don't want to actually go there. I accept that it's probably my own limitation. My ability to suspend disbelief fails me, and now I'm actually there. So I might have kicked him out of the club too, I don't really know. The narrator of Pickman's Model, a man named Thurber, had been an artist cohort of Pickman, who, after the artist's mysterious disappearance, describes to the listener, referred to as Elliot, a surrogate for us, the reader. The time Pickman himself took him on a tour of his personal workspace and gallery, hidden away in the rundown back alleys of the North End section of Boston. According to Pickman, the world is riddled with hidden connections in deep subterranean levels, even here in New England. The homes of old families, whose infamous names we'd recognize from history, were connected beneath the city for reasons unknown, but suspected to be evil, or at least nefarious. Normal people have been reluctant to go exploring these nether reaches of the world, and antiquarians have stated that such ancient homes and foundations had long since disappeared from the backwater of Boston. They just didn't want to see them. There are even places in Boston which, for many reasons, have never been adequately explored by the general public, only known to foreigners who aren't really part of civilized society anyway. Thurber has a taste for the old way, when things were more alive, more haunted with ancient ghosts and memories. And the deeper you dig, the older and more magical things became. Thurber says,
"Out of 10 surviving houses built before 1700, I can show you something queer in the cellar. There's hardly a month that you don't read about workmen finding bricked-up arches and wells leading nowhere in this or that old place as it comes down. You could see one near Henchman Street from the elevated last year. There were witches and what their spells summoned, pirates and what they brought in from the sea, smugglers, privateers. And I tell you, people knew how to live and how to enlarge the bounds of life in the old times. This wasn't the only world a bold and wise man could know. And to think of today in contrast, with such pale pink brains that even a club of supposed artists gets shudders and convulsions if a picture goes beyond the feelings of a Beacon Street tea table. The only saving grace of the present is that it's too damn stupid to question the past very closely."
The shadiness of the area was why Pickman was able to score the studio complex for a good price in the slums. In grand Lovecraftian style, he describes the underground as a veritable ghoul highway, the cemeteries linked to waterways connected to the dens of warlocks. We've known the author to spin the odd yarn about the dead, the undead, sorcerers, and sea monsters, but usually in ancient waspy villages smelling of seawater and overgrown vegetation, abandoned buildings and graveyards. Setting the story in such a modern, lively city as Boston is unexpected from an old paper scratcher like Lovecraft, but a welcome one. Of course, it's in an old forgotten part of the city, so it's still Lovecraftian. Digging down another layer into the sub-basement of the character of Pickman. According to him, his distant ancestors were Old Salem stock, his great-great-great-great-grandmother having been hanged by Cotton Mather during the Salem witch trials of 1692. By the way, Picton and Upton are real Old Salem names. The further Pickman took Thurber into the underground studios, the narrator continued, the stranger and danker the rooms became, and the more bizarre the paintings. The artist stated that he painted in the cellar because, quote, "this is where the inspiration is thickest." Images of dog-like men, or men like dogs, darting across Boston's subway platforms, attacking commuters, or gathered in blood rites and sacrifices in classic Lovecraft form. An almost canine humanoid hunched over a dying human boy, biting the meat from his bones. Pickman admitted while leading the tour that he often made use of photographs to help fill in the details of each bizarre painting, a fact that Thurber had already assumed. Such detail, such a sense of being there. But every painter had done this. And then the artist would add and perfect the true subject of the image, the velveted royal in a portrait, the flawless bowl of fruit in still life, or in this case, the bloody humanoid monster in the horrorscape. Just then, Pickman started at a clattering sound that came from behind a door, leading deeper into the cellar and even further downward, away from civilization. The artist shushed Thurber at the sound, pulled out a revolver, and bolted away, closing the door behind him. Shots were fired. During the melee, the narrator mindlessly grabbed for a rolled piece of paper tacked to the gruesome painting. Then Pickman returned in a waft of gun smoke. "There were some rats in the hall that needed shooting," he said proudly. Completely normal. But it was a welcome end to the scariest gallery tour of the narrator's life. After leaving the snaking alleyways of the North End, the narrator realized he had nervously grabbed and put the rolled piece of paper in his pocket when the shots were fired. He unrolled it to reveal a photograph, most likely another interior shot to be used to fill in the background of the painting of the monster chewing someone's limbs. In fact, it was just a photo of the very room he had been standing in a moment before in the artist's cellar. There in the photo was the crouched humanoid figure in the clear detail of real life. The blood rushed out of Thurber's face as he stood on the sidewalk gaping at his proof of the other world. The world that all these hurrying Bostonites had written off as myth generations ago. It would only exist for them in the grotesquerie of freaks like Pickman, right? Wrong. You see, as the Boston Art Club had missed, Pickman had never drawn his inspiration from a diseased imagination, but from real monsters that were part of our waking world. The normal man preferred to be reassured, to pretend these creatures only existed in fiction. But now Thurber knew, like it or not, that the modern mortal world was still connected to the old. The mysterious green oceans, the disremembered witchlands and dead meadows. Thurber was so traumatized he would never set foot in a cellar or subway tunnel for the remainder of his life. In the strange format of a semi-conversation between Eliot and Thurber, we entertain the question of true creativity. Thurber seems to believe that in order to create really effective work in the realm of, let's use Pickman's case, morbid art, the artist needs to fully understand, quote, the anatomy of the terrible or the physiology of fear. The exact sorts of lines and proportions that connect up with latent instincts or hereditary memories of fright, and proper color contrasts and lighting effects to stir the dormant sense of strangeness. This is one of the things I love about Lovecraft. He's really interested in the psychology and the mechanics of the mind, why human nature tends towards certain fears or appetites. He's aware of innate animal mechanisms that appear almost programmed by millions of years of evolution. He uses the term hereditary memories, but whatever. We know that even babies can recognize the serpentine movements of a snake and react to them as a threat. The exact sort of lines and proportions that connect up with latent instincts. These are real phenomena. In cinematography, there are biologically based memory colors, which the human eye reacts to without even knowing it. If the blue of the sky, the green of the grass, the red of the flesh is off in any way, the mind will notice it and feel a sense of wrongness. Lovecraft loves wrongness and exploits it all over the place. And why not? Great artists want as many tools in their toolboxes as possible. Thurber seems to say that only a great painter can make a thing really scare or ring true. Does the artist need to be scary in order to create good horror? If they understand it more deeply than you or I, won't their work be stronger? Isn't a Delta blues singer who actually understands and can conjure up real heartache and loss more compelling in their art? My opinion, when it comes to creating scary art, is that the artist himself doesn't need to be scary, just needs to be scarable. I don't know that Edgar Allan Poe was himself scary, but he clearly understood being scared, feeling afraid. Even as a kid, I remember reading Poe and being amazed at his ability to transport me to different times and places, with the minimum number of words possible, of course. It's Poe. He knew exactly how to craft the words. Kind of reminds me of Bach. Bach will never be outdated, nor will Mr. Poe. Perfect things don't become outdated until AI can compose perfect music and literature. And I hope that never happens because I want something that comes from someone's mind. Poe knew what scared him, and that's why it scares us. Now, Poe, one of the creepiest writers of the eeriest speculative fiction, was idolized by HP Lovecraft. HP was famously inspired by the morbid aspects of Poe's literature and mentioned him many times in his essays, poems, and even correspondence. He wrote, "When I write stories, Edgar Allan Poe is my model. Poe was my god of fiction." However, much of what is called Lovecraftian refers to a certain brand of dread one doesn't really see from Poe, an awe of something not just beyond our understanding, but beyond little old humans on a much longer time scale than mere human generations. Something horrific to behold, often ancient, and in the case of Cthulhu, to be worshipped like a god. I don't think Poe ever went there, because I don't think that's what scared Poe. Yes, HP revered Edgar Allan, but his work was less about the paranoia and inner torment of his protagonists, and more about dealing with a looming alien threat, fantastical creatures, forces beyond our control. Supernatural? Sometimes, but that wasn't the main point. Lovecraft's dark forces are otherworldly in a sense, but the reason they are scary is because they are from this world, just a version of our world that we have written off as myth. In some ways, I think that the scientific method and modern critical thinking have ruined us for anything otherworldly or mythical. The myths found in holy books simply don't make sense anymore. Sense, imagine that. So it's good and bad. I'm not worried by ghost stories or tales of demonic possession if those supernatural elements are the only source of creepiness. But a great horror author like the fictional Pickman knows how to draw the specific lines and shadows and colors to guide you away from your natural disbelief and into his world of speculation. Science can be a buzzkill, but I'm still excited about this kind of writing because as long as there are unexplored corners, deep waters, undiscovered tribes, and exoplanets, there will still be room for Lovecraft's open-mouthed, wide-eyed wonder. He asks, can you imagine if there was an entire world just beyond our level of perception that was on a scale of time beyond eons? A history more vast than the blink of an eye Homo sapiens has been on this planet, and that if discovered, would show you that your gut-level terrors are not entirely unwarranted.